The billionaire laughed at her, the shy chef's daughter with a recipe no one believed in. But the night she slipped back into the quiet kitchen, she created something unforgettable. Her dish burned with secret flavors no one expected, and soon, it was the talk of every table. What was her secret? Before we begin, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and let's dive into a world where truth and betrayal dance together. Ready? Let's begin. I still remember the day Mr. Bennett walked through the swinging doors of our kitchen, his steps echoing like a metronome that no one dared to break. The air turned sharp with the scent of seared beef and rosemary, but the usual hush of the kitchen fell even deeper when he arrived. He wore his tailored suit like a second skin, expensive watch glinting with every movement. Everyone else straightened their aprons and adjusted their hats as though the smallest detail out of place would bring down his judgment. My father, the head chef, barely inclined his head, his knife still working in perfect rhythm as he diced onions into uniform cubes. Me? I tried to blend in with the shadows behind the sink, my hands plunged into soapy water, pretending I was invisible. Mr. Bennett's gaze swept the room like a spotlight, pausing on each chef and sous chef with a nod or a clipped word of approval. Then his eyes landed on me, and the smallest smile touched his lips, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah," he said, his voice like velvet stretched thin over steel. "The shy one, isn't she?" His words were meant to be a joke, but the way the kitchen chuckled only made the heat rise to my cheeks. My father didn't say a word, just kept dicing, but I saw the tension in his shoulders. He was a proud man who had worked his whole life to earn respect from men like Mr. Bennett. I was just his daughter, a ghost in a white apron. Mr. Bennett turned away from me and began discussing the night's special with my father, but his words barely registered in my ears. My heart was pounding, not because I feared him, but because of the quiet challenge in his smirk. That look, like I was nothing more than a garnish on a plate, stayed with me even after he left. My father didn't speak of it, but I knew he noticed. Later that night, as we locked up and walked to the bus stop together, he gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Don't mind him," he said, his voice soft in the cool night air. "People like that don't see what's behind the pot. They only see what's served." I nodded, but I didn't believe it. I wanted Mr. Bennett to see me. I wanted the world to see me. But wanting and doing were two different things, and I was still the girl who flinched when the bell rang and the orders started pouring in. I'd grown up in this kitchen, watched my father's hands turn raw from years of chopping and stirring, watched him pour everything he had into perfecting dishes that other people would claim as their own. I learned early that talent meant nothing if no one knew your name, and mine was never spoken. At night, when the kitchen finally went quiet and the last pot was scrubbed clean, I would slip out my battered notebook. It was my secret, pages stained with sauce and scribbled with notes in the margins. My father never asked what I wrote in there, and I never offered. In those pages, I was more than a helper. I was a creator. My fingers itched to bring those dishes to life, but there was never time, never space, and never a reason that anyone else would understand. Mr. Bennett came to the kitchen every week after that first day. He liked to show up unannounced, his presence a reminder of who signed the paychecks and who held the power. Each time he visited, he would give me that same smile, the one that said I was invisible, and each time I would feel a quiet fury bubbling up in my chest. My father said to let it go, that respect was earned over decades, not demanded in moments. But I was tired of waiting. One night, after Mr. Bennett's visit had left the kitchen's laughter ringing in my ears like knives on a cutting board, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in my small room, staring at the cracked ceiling, and all I could see was his smirk. I got up, wrapped myself in my jacket, and went back to the kitchen. The streets were empty, the moon high and cold above the city skyline. I used my father's key to unlock the door, slipping inside like a whisper. The kitchen was a different world at night. No clanging pots, no shouted orders. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint scent of herbs clinging to the air. I pulled out my notebook and laid it open on the counter, my hands shaking. The dish I'd been dreaming of, creamy garlic herb pasta with a smoky chili crunch, felt like a secret I was finally ready to share. I gathered the ingredients in careful silence, each motion deliberate, like a ritual. The pasta boiled, the garlic sizzled in the pan, and I added the smoked chili oil in slow, measured drizzles. I tasted, adjusted, and tasted again, the flavors dancing on my tongue. When it was done, I plated it with trembling hands and sat down at the counter. I took the first bite, and the warmth of the cream, the sharpness of the garlic, and the slow burn of the chili filled my mouth. It was everything I wanted it to be: comfort and fire, old memories and new dreams. I closed my eyes and let the flavors settle into my bones. In that moment, I wasn't the shy chef's daughter anymore. I was someone who could create something worth remembering. I cleaned up every trace of my midnight cooking, washing the pans until they shone and wiping down the counters until they were spotless. As I locked up and walked back into the night, the cold air bit at my cheeks, but inside me there was only warmth. I didn't know what I would do with my dish, or if anyone would ever taste it. But for the first time, I didn't care. I had done it for myself. The next morning, the kitchen was alive with the usual rush, orders flying, and the clatter of pans filling the air. I took my place at the sink, hands in soapy water, but my mind was still on the pasta I'd made. Mr. Bennett arrived later that day, his steps as confident as ever, but when he glanced at me, I didn't flinch. I held his gaze, just for a second, and he looked away first. He didn't know it yet, but the girl he thought was invisible had found her fire, and I wasn't going to let anyone snuff it out. The next night, after the kitchen's clang and clatter had settled into silence, I found myself drawn back to that same spot. My father had already gone home, and the rest of the staff had drifted away to the bars or the late-night buses that carried them back to cramped apartments like ours. I stayed behind, hands still red from washing pots, heart still thumping from the idea that wouldn't let me sleep. The pasta had been good, better than good, eh? It had felt like a voice I'd been holding back my whole life. I couldn't let it go. So I locked the door behind me and turned the burners on, the familiar hiss and heat greeting me like an old friend. I gathered the ingredients again, more deliberate this time, each motion an act of faith in myself. I pulled out the garlic and fresh parsley from the walk-in fridge, the smoked chilies from the back shelf where no one ever looked, the cream and butter that I'd seen my father use 100 times but never like this. My fingers worked quickly, muscle memory taking over, but in the quiet kitchen, every sound felt magnified. The pop of oil in the pan, the steady chop of the knife, my own breath, slow and even, like a prayer. I thought of Mr. Bennett then. How his smirk had felt like a brand seared into my skin. But tonight, he was nowhere near this kitchen. Tonight, it was just me and the stove, the scent of garlic and herbs filling the air like a promise. I adjusted the heat, letting the sauce thicken just right, watching as the cream turned from pale white to a golden hue flecked with green. When it was ready, I plated it carefully, wiping the edge of the bowl clean with a damp cloth. Presentation mattered, even if I was the only one who would ever see it. I tasted it again, and the flavors unfolded on my tongue like a secret I'd been waiting to tell. The creamy warmth balanced by the sharp heat, the smoky crunch that came at the end like a slow burn of confidence. My chest ached with something that wasn't sadness, wasn't fear, something closer to hunger, but not for food. Hunger for something bigger. I wanted someone to taste this and understand who I was. I wanted them to see more than just the shy girl with her head down by the sink. The next few nights, I did the same. Stayed behind. Cooked. Tasted. I tried variations, more garlic one night, more chilies the next, pushing and pulling at the recipe like a sculptor shaping clay. My notebook became a testament to every adjustment, every fleeting idea that danced across my mind as I worked. I filled page after page with notes, sketches of plating designs, even a few scribbled dreams I'd never dare say out loud. My father's voice echoed in my head, telling me to be careful, to remember my place. But I couldn't. Not anymore. One night, as I was finishing up, the door creaked open and my father walked in. His brow furrowed, lines deepened by years of hard work and harder disappointment. "You're still here?" he asked, his voice tired but not unkind. I nodded, wiping my hands on my apron. He looked at the bowl of pasta on the counter, at the notebook open beside it, and his mouth tightened. "You shouldn't waste the ingredients like this," he said. "They're expensive." "Mr. Bennett, it's my own," I said, cutting him off for the first time in my life. My voice was soft, but it didn't shake. "I'm using scraps and leftovers. It's not waste." My father said nothing, just looked at me for a long moment. Then he sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You're like your mother," he said quietly, "always dreaming too big for this world." He walked out without another word, and I felt both a sting and a swell of pride. I was like her, and I wasn't going to stop. The next day, the contest was announced. Mr. Bennett stood at the front of the kitchen, a gleam in his eye that made the younger sous chefs straighten their backs and the older ones exchange wary glances. "We're looking for something new," he said, his voice smooth as the marble countertop he leaned against. "Something that will set us apart from every other restaurant in this city. One dish. One chance." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "The winner will have their dish featured on the menu at every location. It'll be a signature item, your signature." The room buzzed with excitement, but my father didn't look at me. He just kept his eyes on the cutting board, his knife moving in precise strokes. I could feel the unspoken warning in the set of his shoulders. Don't even think about it. But I was already thinking about it. My heart was pounding with the possibilities, my mind racing with every flavor I tasted in the quiet of the night. I wanted this. Not just for me, but for every silent hour I'd spent proving to myself that I was more than the girl with the dishwater hands. The rules were simple. Submit your recipe anonymously. Let the food speak for itself. No names, no titles, just the dish. It felt like the universe was handing me an invitation I'd been waiting for my whole life. That night, I wrote my recipe out in careful, looping script, every ingredient measured, every instruction detailed. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. My dish was enough. I sealed it in an envelope and dropped it in the box outside Mr. Bennett's office, my hands trembling as I let it go. As I walked away, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. My father's words still echoed in my mind, but so did the memory of Mr. Bennett's smirk. I wasn't doing this for either of them. I was doing it for me. That night, I didn't go back to the kitchen. I let myself rest, let myself breathe. I lay in bed and let the images of creamy sauce and smoky chilies play behind my eyelids like a promise. In the quiet, I whispered to the dark, "Let them taste it. Let them see." Because I wasn't the shy chef's daughter anymore. Not tonight. Tonight, I was a chef, and I was ready to be seen. The days that followed felt like I was living in a dream I didn't dare wake from. The kitchen thrummed with an electric excitement that cut through the usual clatter of pots and the hiss of steam. Everyone was talking about the contest, who would enter, what flavors would dazzle Mr. Bennett in the tasting panel. Even the old guard, chefs who had been here longer than I'd been alive, seemed to carry themselves a little taller, their eyes flicking over one another's cutting boards like silent challenges. But no one looked at me, and that suited me just fine. I spent those days in the corners of the kitchen, peeling carrots, scrubbing pans, blending into the shadows I'd always known. My father didn't say much, but I could see the storm in his eyes. He'd always told me to be humble, to work hard and never draw attention to myself. "They won't see you," he said once, wiping sweat from his brow as he tended to a simmering pot. "Not the way you want them to. This world isn't kind to girls like you." He meant it as a warning, but I'd always heard the sorrow in his voice, like he was speaking from the scars he carried. The night before the contest tasting, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling that seemed to echo every doubt in my heart. What if no one noticed my dish? What if Mr. Bennett took one bite and spat it out, laughing like he always did when he thought something wasn't worth his time? I pressed my palms against the cool sheets, willing the panic to stay down. I thought of the creamy pasta, of the slow burn of the chili crunch that lingered like a secret on the tongue. I believed in it. That was all I had, and it had to be enough. The next morning, the kitchen buzzed with an almost frantic energy. Mr. Bennett's assistants arrived early, crisp white jackets spotless, clipboards in hand. They moved through the room with an authority that made even the most seasoned chefs straighten their backs. I kept my head down, eyes on the pots, but my heart beat so loud it drowned out the sizzle of garlic in the pan. My father worked beside me, his hands steady even as the tension crackled in the air. He hadn't spoken about the contest since the announcement. I didn't know if he guessed that I'd entered, or if he was too wrapped up in his own worries to notice. Maybe it was easier for him not to see. We'd both learned to survive in the quiet spaces between words. When Mr. Bennett arrived, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. He walked in with that same effortless confidence, his suit tailored to perfection, his eyes scanning the kitchen like he owned the very air we breathed. And in a way, he did. He was the name above the door, the signature on every paycheck. He was the one we all answered to, even when we told ourselves we cooked for the love of it. He didn't look at me as he made his way to the center of the kitchen, but I felt his presence like a heat at my back. He clapped his hands once, a sharp sound that cut through the noise. "Today," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "we see what you can do when you're not following my recipes. Today, we see if any of you have the spark to bring something new to this place." His smile was thin, almost cruel. One dish. One chance. The chefs moved with a controlled urgency, each one bringing their carefully crafted creation to the tasting table. The air filled with the mingling aromas of roasted meats, bright herbs, rich sauces. I watched from my corner, heart pounding with every plate that passed by. My father presented his dish. A seared duck breast with a cherry reduction that I'd seen him perfect over years of quiet practice. He didn't look at me as he set it down, but I saw the flicker of hope in his eyes. And then it was my turn. The assistant called out the name of my dish, the only label I'd given it, spicy herb pasta. My hands shook as I carried the plate forward, the creamy sauce still warm, the chili crunch glistening in the soft light. I placed it on the table, careful not to let my fingers linger. Mr. Bennett didn't look at me, but he picked up his fork, swirling the pasta with practiced ease. For a moment, the kitchen fell into a hush so deep I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. He took a bite. The seconds stretched out, each one a weight pressing against my ribs. I watched his face, searching for any flicker of expression. He chewed slowly, thoughtfully. Then he took another bite, and another. My breath caught in my throat, a trembling thing that felt like it might shatter if he didn't speak. Finally, he set the fork down and looked up. His eyes found mine, and for the first time, there was no smirk, no dismissive smile. Just a quiet intensity that made me feel seen in a way I never had before. "Who made this?" he asked, his voice low but clear. The assistant looked through the entries, his brow furrowing. "No name, sir. Just chef's daughter." A ripple of surprise went through the room. My father's head snapped up, his eyes locking on mine. For a moment, I saw the fear there. Fear for me, for what I'd risked by stepping into the light. But I didn't look away. I couldn't. Mr. Bennett's lips curved into a slow, thoughtful smile. "Interesting," he said, his fingers drumming against the edge of the table. "Very interesting." He didn't say anything else, just moved on to the next dish. But I saw it in his eyes. The spark of curiosity, the first crack in the wall he'd built between himself and the rest of us. The rest of the tasting passed in a blur. I don't remember what the other dishes looked like, what Mr. Bennett said to anyone else. All I could think of was the way his gaze had settled on me, the way my father's shoulders had stiffened in quiet alarm. When it was over, the plates cleared and the tasting notes tucked away, Mr. Bennett stood. "We'll announce the winning dish tomorrow," he said, his voice calm but edged with something I couldn't quite name. "Until then, back to work." The kitchen erupted into motion, chefs moving quickly to prep for the dinner rush. My father turned to me, his mouth opening like he wanted to say something, then closing again. In the end, he just placed a hand on my shoulder, a heavy weight that said more than words ever could. I didn't know if it was pride or worry or both. I didn't ask. As I scrubbed pots that night, the scent of my dish still lingered in the air, a ghost of flavors that felt like hope. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, I felt like I'd stepped out of the shadows. And no matter what happened, I wasn't going back. The morning after the tasting felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to see if the ground would hold or if I'd fall straight into the emptiness below. The kitchen was quieter than usual, a tense calm settling over the stainless steel and polished counters. Everyone was busy, but no one spoke above a murmur. Even the clanging of pots and pans seemed muted, like the kitchen itself was holding its breath along with us. My father moved with careful precision, his face a mask of stoic calm, but I saw the way his fingers drummed against the counter when he thought no one was looking. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that I hadn't meant to step into the light, that I'd only wanted to share something of my own. But I didn't. The words felt too small, too fragile. Mr. Bennett was late. He never was, and that alone made the air crackle with something sharp and expectant. When the door finally swung open and he stepped inside, his suit immaculate as always, the hush fell even deeper. His gaze swept over the kitchen, pausing for a breath of a moment on me, then moving on like I was nothing more than another piece of equipment in the room. My stomach twisted, but I kept my head down, scrubbing at the same pot over and over until my knuckles ached. He didn't say a word until he reached the center of the kitchen. He rested one hand on the counter, the other in his pocket, and let the silence stretch like a taut wire. "Yesterday," he said finally, his voice low and even, "I asked for something new, something that would remind me why we do this, why we push ourselves past exhaustion, past doubt." He paused, his eyes scanning the room. "And one of you delivered." The words hit me like a jolt of electricity, my breath catching in my chest. Around me, chefs exchanged glances, quiet murmurs rippling through the air. My father's hand tightened around the handle of his knife, his jaw clenched tight. Mr. Bennett's gaze settled back on me, and this time he didn't look away. He picked up a fork from the counter, the polished metal catching the light. "The spicy herb pasta," he said, his voice almost a whisper but carrying across the room like a shout. "A dish with heart, with soul." He let the words hang there, a soft reverence that felt like it should belong to someone else, not me. "It's not perfect," he continued, and my heart sank a little. "But it's alive, and that's what we're missing." My hands were shaking, the soapy water around my fingers turning cold. I felt like the ground might give way beneath me at any moment. My father turned to look at me, his eyes dark with something I couldn't read, pride, fear, something in between. I held his gaze for a breath, then looked back at Mr. Bennett. He set the fork down with a soft clank. "This dish will be our new signature," he said, his words final, the decision made. "It will go on the menu next month in every restaurant we own." A murmur swept through the kitchen, some faces lighting up with excitement, others darkening with quiet resentment. I felt both the weight and the lightness of it settle into my bones, an anchor and a set of wings all at once. My father didn't say a word, but I saw the way his shoulders stiffened, the way his mouth pressed into a thin line. I wanted to go to him, to tell him I hadn't meant to steal anyone's spotlight. But there was no time. Mr. Bennett turned and walked out, the click of his shoes against the tile a steady rhythm that echoed in my chest. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Orders came in, plates went out, and I moved through it all like I was underwater. Every time I turned around, I caught glimpses of chefs watching me, some with curiosity, some with a guarded distance that made my skin prickle. I was still the shy girl in the corner, but now they knew my name, even if it was only chef's daughter, written in the tasting notes. That night, as the last plates were scrubbed and the kitchen lights dimmed, my father finally spoke. He stood at the sink beside me, his hands buried in suds, and said quietly, "You've put a target on your back. You know that?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made me shiver. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I know," I whispered. He sighed, the sound heavy with years of things he'd never said. "They'll expect you to fail," he said, his eyes fixed on the pots in the sink. "They'll wait for it." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Then I won't," I said, the words steady even as my hands shook. My father didn't say anything else, just nodded once and went back to washing the dishes. It wasn't an apology, and it wasn't approval. But it was enough. When I finally left the kitchen that night, the city felt different somehow, sharper, brighter. I walked home under the flickering streetlights, the cold biting at my cheeks, and I let myself dream. I dreamed of people sitting at tables in restaurants I'd never seen, tasting my pasta and smiling. I dreamed of Mr. Bennett's smirk gone, replaced by that quiet curiosity. I dreamed of being more than the girl behind the sink. I knew it wouldn't be easy. My father was right. There would be eyes on me now, waiting for me to stumble. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to hide. I had stepped into the light, and even if it burned, I was going to stand there and let them see me. The week after my dish was chosen was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. My father's kitchen, the place I'd known since I was a little girl, where I learned to balance plates taller than my head and scrub pans until my hands bled, suddenly felt too small. Everyone looked at me differently. Some offered smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, like they were measuring me, trying to decide if I deserved the new place I'd claimed. Others avoided my gaze altogether, as if acknowledging me would break some unspoken rule. My father worked beside me in silence, his shoulders stiff and his brow furrowed. He didn't say much, but I felt the weight of his unspoken fears every time our eyes met. The dish was still just a recipe, but already it had begun to spread like wildfire. Mr. Bennett's marketing team came in, sleek and confident, talking about photo shoots and social media campaigns as if my pasta was just another product to be sold. I watched from the sidelines, feeling both proud and small. They didn't ask me to pose with the dish, didn't want my name on the flyers or my face in the ads. They wanted the story of the chef's daughter, a faceless girl who had poured her soul into a plate of pasta. It stung, but I told myself it didn't matter. Let them have their story. I had my dish. Late at night, when the kitchen was quiet and the last pots were stacked neatly on the shelves, I stayed behind to make the pasta again and again. Each time I cooked it, I felt the same quiet thrill, the swirl of cream in the pan, the sharp tang of garlic, the slow, smoky burn of the chilies that made me feel alive. I tweaked it each night, adding a pinch more of this, a whisper less of that, until it felt like an extension of myself. I wanted every plate served in every restaurant to carry that same warmth, that same fire. One evening, Mr. Bennett called me into his office. It was a small room at the back of the restaurant, walls lined with awards and framed newspaper clippings of his face in interviews. He didn't look up right away, just kept his eyes on the papers spread across his desk. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost casual. "Your dish is getting attention," he said, and I couldn't help the way my heart fluttered in my chest. "We're expecting a surge in orders once it launches." He looked at me then, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Are you ready for that?" I swallowed, my hands twisting in the hem of my apron. "Yes," I said, even though I didn't feel it completely. He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Good," he said, "because this isn't just about one dish. It's about setting a standard. Do you understand?" I nodded again, the words catching in my throat. "I understand," I whispered. He dismissed me with a wave of his hand, and I walked back to the kitchen, my mind buzzing. Outside, the city lights blinked like tiny fires, and for the first time, I let myself think that maybe, just maybe, I had started a fire of my own. My father was waiting for me when I returned. He didn't ask what Mr. Bennett had said, didn't pry the way he used to when I was younger and came home with scraped knees and tear-streaked cheeks. He just looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once, a silent benediction I felt deep in my bones. The launch day arrived, and the kitchen was a whirlwind of activity. The new menus were printed, the staff briefed until every word was etched into their minds. My pasta dish was listed in bold letters, signature dish, spicy herb pasta. No mention of my name, No hint of the late nights I'd spent perfecting it, but it was there all the same. I stood at the sink, watching as plates flew out of the kitchen, each one carrying a piece of me into the world beyond those swinging doors. The first night, the orders didn't stop. Table after table asked for the new dish, and each plate that left the pass felt like a piece of my heart carried away on a white ceramic canvas. I moved faster than I ever had, washing and scrubbing, my hands raw but my spirit thrumming with something electric. My father moved beside me, his focus unbroken, but every so often he would glance at me, and in those fleeting glances, I saw something I hadn't seen before: pride. After service, when the last table was cleared and the kitchen began to wind down, Mr. Bennett appeared at the door. He looked around the room, his eyes bright with something like satisfaction. "Good work tonight," he said, his voice carrying just enough weight to still the murmurs of the staff. "The dish is a success." His gaze found mine, lingering for a moment that felt like a promise. "You did well." He didn't say my name. He never did. But I didn't care. The quiet triumph in his tone was enough. I nodded, my hands trembling as I reached for another pot to scrub. My father said nothing, but he placed a hand on my shoulder as he passed, a brief squeeze that said everything words never could. That night, as I walked home through the sleeping city, I let myself smile. The restaurant was still Mr. Bennett's, and the world would always see me as the shy girl in the corner. But I had made something real, something that would outlast the smirks and the silence. The dish was mine, and it was enough. For now, it was enough. Weeks passed, and the dish became more than just a name on the menu. It became a signature that people asked for by name, even if they didn't know the name of the girl who had dreamed it up in the quiet hours of the night. The creamy swirl of sauce, the sharp garlic bite, the smoky, lingering heat, it had a way of sticking in people's memories. I saw it in the empty plates that came back from the dining room, in the quiet satisfaction on the faces of the servers as they carried the orders out, plate after plate. It was a small victory, but it felt like the start of something bigger, something that didn't need words or applause to matter. Mr. Bennett never said my name, never asked me to step out from behind the sink where I still worked. But sometimes, I'd catch him watching me from across the room, a thoughtful glint in his eyes that said he remembered what I had done. My father said little, but I saw the way he moved around me now, not protective, but proud in the way only a father can be, even if he didn't have the words to say it out loud. The kitchen was still the same in so many ways, hot, fast, and unyielding, but it felt different, too. The corners where I used to hide no longer felt like shadows. They felt like places I had chosen to stand, places where I belonged because I had put something of myself into the very walls. There were still moments of doubt, of course. There were whispers from some of the older chefs who said I'd just been lucky, that Mr. Bennett had chosen my dish as a novelty, a fleeting spark. I heard them in the quiet hours, felt them in the sideways glances that said I hadn't earned my place. But every time I heard those voices, I remembered the nights I had spent in the empty kitchen, the soft clatter of pots and the scent of garlic and smoke filling the air like a promise. No one could take that from me. No one could tell me it didn't matter. One night, long after the last customer had left and the kitchen was still with the quiet hum of the refrigerator, I stood at the stove and made the dish one more time. I worked slowly, each motion deliberate and familiar, like a song I had known since childhood. The pasta boiled, the sauce thickened, the chilies crackled in the oil, and I felt the same surge of quiet triumph I had felt the very first time. When it was done, I plated it carefully and sat down at the counter. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, and with each mouthful, I felt the distance between who I had been and who I had become. I thought of my mother then, of the stories my father used to tell me about how she had loved to cook, how she had believed that food was more than just sustenance, that it was a way to share something deeper, something wordless and true. I thought of her hands, always warm, always gentle, and I wondered what she would have said if she could see me now. Maybe she would have smiled that quiet smile my father wore when he thought no one was looking. Maybe she would have told me that I was enough, that I always had been. When I finished the last bite, I cleaned the counter and put the dishes away, moving slowly, like I was saying goodbye to a chapter of my life. I didn't know what came next. Maybe Mr. Bennett would ask for another dish, another spark of something new to keep the restaurant's name shining bright. Maybe he wouldn't. But I knew one thing. I wouldn't be the shy girl hiding in the corners anymore. I had found my voice, even if it was just in the swirl of cream and the slow burn of chilies. As I walked home that night, the city lights blinking in the distance, I let myself imagine a future that was bigger than this kitchen, bigger than the name above the door. I didn't need to be famous or celebrated. I didn't need my name in lights. All I needed was the quiet knowledge that I had taken something small and made it beautiful, that I had turned a handful of ingredients into something people would remember. That was my quiet triumph. When I reached my apartment, I paused at the door and looked back at the street that had carried me home so many nights before. The wind was soft, carrying the faint scent of bread and coffee from the late-night cafes. I breathed it in and felt a small, fierce smile tug at my lips. I had fed the world a piece of my heart, and they had devoured it. They might never know my name, but they would know my dish, and that was enough. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, the warmth of the small apartment wrapping around me like a promise. I set my notebook on the table, its pages worn and smudged with memories, and I opened it to the next blank page. My pen hovered there, the future waiting in the white space. I didn't know what I would write next, but I knew I would keep going, keep creating, keep finding ways to let my voice be heard. Because that's what my mother had taught me, what my father had shown me, what I had learned in the quiet hours of the kitchen when no one was watching. And if Mr. Bennett's smirk ever found me again, if the world tried to push me back into the shadows, I would stand a little taller, speak a little louder, and serve them the truth of who I was, one plate at a time. Because I was the shy chef's daughter once. But now I was the chef, and that was all the light I needed. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to our channel for more inspiring tales like this one. Your comments and likes help us keep sharing these stories. Thank you for listening.